I have stood in a great many queues in my life, most of them in the rain, and in 60 years I had never once seen a king's sentry move his eyes. That morning at the Almsgate, he moved them twice. Both times they went to the same man, and the man they went to had no idea he was being looked at, which is the only reason he lived out the week with his pride intact for as long as he did. My name is Merritt Dunn. I was 79 that autumn, a farrier corporal of the 3rd Horse when I had a use, and I was 3rd in the queue at the Almsgate window on the first Thursday of frost month, which in the kingdom of Eldermore is pension day for the old companies. The Almsgate is the little side gate in the outer wall of Harrogate Palace, black iron in grey stone, and behind it there is a wooden shutter with a brass grille, and behind that a clerk with a ledger, and behind him a strong box, and behind all of it presumably the king. We never see the king. We see the clerk. On the first Thursday of every month, some 40 of us shuffle up Almsgate Row from the almshouses and the back rooms and the chandlers' lofts, and we say our names and our numbers to the grill, and the clerk counts out what the crown owes us for the years we gave it, and we say thank you, and we go home. It is not a great deal of money. It has never been a great deal of money. But it is paid into your hand by a man who says your name aloud at a gate of the palace, and any old soldier will tell you that the paying is not the point of it. The saying of the name is the point of it. Ahead of me that morning stood Corwin Ashe. You would not have looked at him twice. That is the truth, and it is the whole of the wrong I am going to describe to you, and I want it understood from the start. He was 84. He stood 5 feet and 6 inches when he made the effort, which he made every pension day, because he considered the Almsgate a parade. He wore a coat that had been a sapper's coat in the rain before this one, brushed to within an inch of its life, and a cane he had cut and shaped himself out of ash, and on his left breast he wore his ribbons. There were 4 of them. There should have been 5. On the bar there was a 5th loop, empty, the stitching worn pale where something had been meant to hang and never had. In 30 years of standing behind him in that queue I had never once heard him mention it, and I had never once seen him take the bar off and hide the bare loop, either. He wore it out where the world could see it. That is a particular kind of courage, and if you have to have it explained to you, I cannot explain it. On the box at the gate stood the sentry. The Almsgate post is not a glamorous post. The great forecourt gets the crowds and the phones and the tour guides with their little flags. The Almsgate gets pensioners, delivery carts, and pigeons. A guardsman gets the Almsgate when he is young. This one was young. Guardsman Tobin Rook, though I did not know his name that morning. I learned it later, and I learned rather a lot else besides. Red tunic, black bearskin, the chin strap cutting a line under a mouth that did not move, white gloves, the rifle at his side, the toe of the butt an inch off the stone, boots you could have shaved in. He was, by every rule the palace has written down, furniture. A sentry at the Almsgate may challenge. He may not converse. He may not answer questions or accept gifts or notice whether or take an interest in a civil dispute between 2 members of the public on the wrong side of his wall. He stands his 2 hours. He is relieved. He goes and drinks tea. He comes back. The palace has been very clear about this for 400 years, and the clarity is the point. The sentry is a wall with a heartbeat, and a wall that starts having opinions is no longer a wall. So when I say that at 11 minutes past 9 that morning his eyes moved, I want you to understand that I noticed it the way you would notice a statue clearing its throat. They went left down the row, past the queue, to the 2 young men who had just come round the corner from Candle Market. I turned to look because I am old and nosy. One of them was holding up a phone, already filming, walking backwards and grinning at his own screen. The other was doing the walking that young men do when they want a street to know they are on it, shoulders first, hands loose, taking up more room than a man needs. He was perhaps 27, big through the chest, a good coat, hair cropped down to the bone, and a leather folder under one arm that he carried the way a bailiff carries a warrant, which is to say lovingly. His name was Ivo Craddock. I found that out about 90 seconds later when he said it. He came up the row and he stopped at our queue, and he ran his eyes down the length of it. 40 old men and 4 old women, caps and canes and coats, the whole muster of us, waiting in the cold for the shutter to go up, and he smiled as if somebody had left a door open. "Morning, gentlemen," he said. "Don't mind me. I'm here on business." And he walked straight down the line and put himself in front of Corwin Ashe. Not beside, in front, turned around so that his back was to the gate and his chest was 6 inches from an 84-year-old man's face, and he opened his leather folder like a hymnal. "Ashe," he said, "Corwin, number 4471, there you are." He turned the folder round and showed it close the way you show a card trick. "Quillen and Loam, you know the name." "I know the name," said Corwin. I want to tell you about his voice because it matters later. It was not a frail voice. It was a low, unhurried, gravelly thing, and it had been giving orders on a river in winter when this Craddock's father was still deciding whether to bother being born. It did not rise. It never rose the entire time, and I have thought about that a great deal since. "Then you know why I'm here," Craddock said. 31 crowns and 4, today's the day. Window opens at 1/2 past, you'll have it in your hand at 22 and you'll hand it to me at 19 to, and we're all friends. He looked over his shoulder up at the shuttered grill, and then he looked back down at Corwin, and the smile came out again. "I like this arrangement. It's clean. No knocking on doors, no unpleasantness. The crown pays you, you pay us, circle of life." The phone was up. His friend, a narrow, pleased-looking article called Denny Peake, who I would also come to know rather better than I wanted to, had drifted round to get both their faces in the frame, and he was murmuring at his screen the way they do, giving it a little commentary. Now here is a thing you would not necessarily know if you have never been poor and old at the same time. What Craddock had just described is not unusual. It is a business. There are lending houses in the candle market that keep a diary of pension days at the Almsgate, the way a farmer keeps a diary of market days. And on the first Thursday of the month they send a large young man to stand at the gate and take the money out of the hand it was counted into, still warm. It is not illegal. That was the thing that would break my heart for a month. It was not, as everybody kept telling us, illegal. Corwin did not step back. He was pressed nearly to the wall as it was, and stepping back would have meant putting his shoulders against the stone, and he was not going to do that in front of the queue. "You'll have 25, he said. 31 and 4. You'll have 25, same as last month and the month before that and the 16 months before that." Corwin's hand shifted on the ash cane. "I keep 6 for the muster. That has been the arrangement since the beginning, with Quillen himself in his office in front of his own clerk. 6 crowns for the wreath." "The wreath," Craddock repeated. "For the stone of the names." "Tomorrow," Corwin said it flatly, as a man states a fact of the calendar. Tomorrow was the muster of the old companies, the remembrance parade, the one morning of the year when what is left of the old regiments walks the mile from the candle market to the stone of the names in the palace's outer ward, and the king comes out onto the steps, and the names of the dead are read. Corwin had walked it every year for 51 years. He had laid a wreath at the stone every year for 51 years. 11 names on it, always 11. He never explained them and nobody ever asked, and I am ashamed of that now, though I will come to it. 6 crowns, said Craddock, for flowers. For a wreath. For flowers. Craddock laughed, and he turned his head and made sure the phone caught the laugh, and then he leaned down the way you lean down to a dog. "Old man, listen, I don't care what you do with your 6 crowns, and neither does Mr. Quillen, and neither does that." He jerked his chin at the shuttered grill at the palace at 400 years of stone. The interest was re-rated in the spring. You had a letter. 31 and 4 is what the book says, and the book is the book. You'll hand me the lot, and then you can go and pick daisies out of a hedge for your dead friends, and everybody's happy. And he put his hand flat on Corwin Ashe's chest. "Not a blow. I want to be exact, because there were people in the weeks that followed who wanted very much for us all to be inexact. It was a hand, laid flat on the ribbons, on the 4 ribbons and the empty loop, and it pushed not hard but with the whole weight of a young man's arm behind it, the sort of push you give a gate. Corwin's heel caught the lip of the curb. The cane went out sideways, and he went back and down onto one knee on the cobbles of Almsgate Row with a sound I have not managed to stop hearing since, which was not a cry, because he did not make one. It was the sound of an old man's kneecap meeting 400 years of stone. Behind me the queue made a noise. 40-odd of us, and the noise we made was a sort of low, useless growl, and I am telling you the truth when I say that in that half-second I understood exactly how old I was, because I did not move. Not one of us moved. We were all going to. Every man in that line was going to, in about another second and a half. We did not have to. There was a crack of iron on stone, sharp as a shot, and every head in the row turned. The sentry had come off his box. I do not know how to convey to you, if you have not lived here, what that means. A king's sentry does not leave the box. He does not leave the box for rain, for insult, for a woman fainting, for a dog on the parade, for a tourist screaming in his face for 11 minutes about her rights. There is a whole grammar of what he may do without leaving it. A stamp, a half-turn, a challenge given in a voice that will carry to the far end of the row, and the grammar exists precisely so that he never has to leave it. Guardsman Tobin Rook had left it. He had come down off the step and taken 3 paces up the row, and he had stopped and grounded the rifle, and the crack we had heard was the butt plate coming down on the cobblestones with the whole of his weight and the whole of his temper behind it. He stood square. He was looking directly at Ivo Craddock, and the strap under his jaw had gone tight, and he was not, in any way that the palace could later put in a report, doing anything at all. He said one word. "Stand." That was all. It was not shouted. It came out of him like something being set down on a table. Craddock's grin came back on, slower than it had gone off. "It talks," he said to the phone. "Stand back from him," said Rook. "Or what exactly?" Craddock turned to face him properly, and there was the moment, and I saw it, and Denny Peake's phone saw it too, and half of Almsgate Row saw it. He looked at the rifle, and at the bearskin, and at the boy's face under it, and he made his calculation the way his sort always makes it. That this was a costume, that the rifle was a stick, that the boy was a doorstop in fancy dress who was not allowed to so much as blink, and he came up onto his toes and put his own face forward, close. "You're not allowed to touch me," he said. "I know the rules. You're not allowed to do anything." And behind him, on his hands and one knee on the cobbles, Corwin Ashe was quietly, doggedly, gathering his cane. Rook did not touch him. I have gone over it 100 times, and I will swear to it in any court in Eldermore. He did not lay a glove on Ivo Craddock that morning. What he did was worse, from Craddock's point of view, and better from everyone else's. He looked past him. He turned his head perhaps 2 degrees, which in a man built like that is the same as another man crossing a room, and he pitched his voice up at the wall, at the shuttered grill, at the wicket beside the black iron gate, at the whole sleeping bulk of the palace, and he gave the challenge. "Gate assault on the row. Turn out the guard." You have never heard anything like it. It is not a shout. It is a thing they are taught, and it is built to go through stone and rain and a brass band, and it went up Almsgate Row and came back off the almshouse fronts, and every pigeon on the wall went up at once in a clatter like applause. The wicket banged open. 2 guardsmen came through it at the double with a color sergeant behind them, and the color sergeant was a slab of a man of about 50 with a face like a closed account, and the shutter over the grill shot up, and a startled clerk's head appeared behind the brass, and up and down Almsgate Row doors were opening, and the whole quiet business of a Thursday morning came apart in about 4 seconds. Craddock's grin went out like a match in wind. I will say this for him. He understood his position immediately. He put his hands up, palms out, and he stepped back off Corwin Ashe, and he began to talk very fast about a civil matter, a lawful debt, a misunderstanding, a gentleman who had slipped, slip asterisk. Everyone had seen him slip, and Denny Peake, who had lowered his phone the instant the challenge went up, was suddenly extremely interested in the architecture. Color Sergeant Peyton Marsh, that was the slab of a man, looked at Craddock for exactly as long as it took him to decide what Craddock was. Then he looked past him, at the old man on the cobbles, and at the four of us who were now crouched around him, getting our hands under his arms. Then he looked at his sentry, standing 3 paces off his box in the middle of a public row, with a rifle grounded on the king's cobbles. And I watched him decide something. "Constables from the row station will be here in 4 minutes, Marsh said to nobody, in the voice of a man reading a timetable. "You'll wait for them, sir, and give them your name and your employer, or you'll be waiting for them in the Palace Lodge, and I promise you'll like the lodge less." "He's had a fall," Craddock said. "That's all. He's an old man and he's had a fall." "He has," Marsh agreed. "Rook. Color Sergeant. Back on the box." And Tobin Rook took his rifle up off the cobbles and turned about and went back to the box and stepped up and became furniture again. It took perhaps 6 seconds. He did not look at Corwin Ashe. He did not look at Craddock. The chin strap sat where it sat and the eyes went forward, and that was the end of it. And if you had come round the corner from Candlemarket at that exact moment, you would have seen nothing in the whole of Almsgate Row but a sentry standing his post, and a scrum of old men helping one of their own up off the ground. We got Corwin onto his feet. He was grayer than I liked. There was a rip in his trouser knee and a graze under it, and when I tried to look at it, he moved his leg away from my hand as if I had proposed something indecent. "Leave it, Merritt. You want to sit down." "I want my place in the queue," he said. And he took it. He limped back to where he had been standing, 3rd from the front, ahead of me, and he squared himself to the wall, and he put his cane down at his side, and he waited for the window to open, with his ribbons crooked on his chest and his knee bleeding into his stocking, and he did not sit down and he did not go home. That was the first thing. Everything else in this story comes out of that. The constables came, as promised, in 4 minutes. They took Craddock's name, Ivo Craddock, collector, Quillen and Loam office, Candlemarket, and they took Denny Peake's, and they took Corwin's, and they wrote it all in a book. Craddock said the word asterisk slipped asterisk 11 times. I counted. And when the young constable asked Corwin, kindly enough, whether he wished to make a complaint of assault, Corwin looked at his own boots for a while, and then he said, "He put his hand on my chest." "Yes, sir." "Did he strike you?" "No." "Did he shove you?" And Corwin Ashe, who had been shoved to his knees on the king's cobbles in front of 40 men who would have died for him and one who did, said, "He put his hand on my chest," again, and would not say anything else, and the constable closed his book. I want to be fair to that constable. He tried. He said the word civil matter only once, and he had the grace to look sick when he said them. Because that is what it was in law, as the law then stood. A lending house is entitled to recover a lawful debt, and a debtor's pension is not protected, and a hand laid flat on a man's chest in a public street is, in the absence of a complaint, a asterisk slip asterisk. The shutter went up at 9:30. Selby Whitcomb, the pension clerk, a soft, gray, nervous man of 60 with ink on his cuff, called the names one at a time through the brass. When he came to Corwin's, his voice cracked on it, and he counted out 31 crowns and 4 and pushed it under the grill and could not look up. And Ivo Craddock, who had been leaning against the almshouse wall the entire time with his arms folded, waiting, because the constables had told him he was free to wait, straightened up and put out his hand. Corwin gave him 25. 31 and 4. 25. "Old man, you may take me to the county court," said Corwin Ashe, "and you may have the 6 crowns from the magistrate's own hand, and I will pay the magistrate's costs on top of it, and I will still lay that wreath tomorrow if I have to make it out of hedge clippings, which is what you suggested." His hand did not shake. "That is not a thing I am adding for effect. I was 2 feet from it, and it did not shake. Take the 25, boy, and go and tell Halbert Quillen that Corporal Ashe of the 2nd Sappers sends his respects and will see him in frost month, same as always." There was a silence of about 3 seconds. Then Craddock took the 25 and put it in his coat and leaned right in, so close that only the 4 of us at the front heard it, and said, "Tomorrow, then." And he smiled at the sentry on the box on his way past, and the sentry looked through him as if he were a pane of glass, and that right there is what did it. I have thought about this for a long time. It was not the old man that Ivo Craddock could not bear. Old men are nothing to men like that. They are weather. It was being looked asterisk through by a boy in a red coat who was not permitted to look at him at all. Some men can live with being defeated. What they cannot live with is being unimportant. Now I have to leave the row for a moment and tell you about the sentry, because I learned all of this afterwards, most of it from him and some of it from Marsh, and you will not understand the rest of it if I do not. Guardsman Tobin Rook was 24 years old. He had come down out of the Callow Valley, from a village called 12 Bridges, where his father kept a lock on the canal, and he had joined the King's Foot at 19 because there was a picture in his grandmother's kitchen of a man in a red coat, and she used to look at it when she thought nobody was watching. He had been on the Almsgate 3 months. It is where they put you. The forecourt with the crowds and the phones is a performance, and they give it to the men who can hold a face. The Almsgate is a corridor, and they give it to the men who are still learning too. He had, as it happens, a very good face. Marsh told me later that Rook had been marked down twice in his first year for excessive stillness, which I did not know was possible, and which apparently means that a young guardsman has got the idea that the object of the exercise is to be a statue, when the object of the exercise is to be a soldier who happens to be standing still. "There's a difference," Marsh said to me in a tea room off the Candle Market some weeks after all this. "A statue doesn't see anything. That's the whole trouble with them." Rook saw everything. That was the trouble with him. He had seen Craddock come round the corner from Candle Market at 11 minutes past 9, and he had seen the folder, and he had seen the phone, and he had seen, this is the part I did not know until much later, that it was the 4th time. The 4th first, Thursday. Craddock had worked the Almsgate queue in first fall, in reaping, in leaf turn. Different old men mostly, sometimes the same. He had never touched anyone before. He had stood close and talked and laughed and taken money out of hands, and it was all perfectly lawful, and a sentry on the box may not converse, may not intervene in a civil matter, may not so much as turn his head. 3 months Tobin Rook had stood on that box and watched a young man in a good coat take other men's money at the gate of the palace, and had done nothing, because doing nothing was his orders. And on the 4th Thursday, the young man had put his hand on Corwin Ashe's chest, and something in the boy had come off its hinges. They had him in front of Captain Wayland Ordell that same afternoon. I know what was said in that room because Marsh told me, and Marsh told me because by then he had decided I was the sort of old fool who would go and make a nuisance of himself in the right places, which was a fair reading of the situation. The charge, unofficially, was leaving the post. The captain did not want to bring it. Ordell was an honest man in an awkward chair. He had watched Peake's film, which by then had 11,000 views and a caption that read Royal Guard SNAPS AT Old Maness Fall, cut off, of course, 3/4 of a second before the hand went onto Corwin's chest. "You came off the box," Ordell said. "Yes, sir." "Why?" And Rook, who had been standing at attention for 11 minutes and had not offered one word in his own defense, said, "Because I could not do my duty from the box, sir." "Your duty is the gate." "The gate is 50 paces of the King's ground, sir, and the man was on it," said Rook. and he was ours. Ordell looked at him for a while. Explain that. His number is 4471, sir, said Tobin Rook, 2nd Company of Sappers. He gives it at the grill every month and the clerk writes it down and nobody hears it. He's ours, sir. That gate is where the Crown says his name out loud once a month, and a man was standing in front of it with his hand on his chest, and I could see the number on his ribbon bar from where I stood. There was, Marsh says, a long pause. Then Ordell said, "You will be reprimanded for leaving the post. It will be entered. It will follow you." "Yes, sir." "And you will be off the Almsgate." That, Marsh says, was the only moment the boy's face moved. Because the muster was the next morning. And the muster route runs from the Candle Market, up Almsgate Row, in through the Almsgate itself, and across the outer ward to the Stone of the Names. And a guardsman taken off the Almsgate is a guardsman who will not be standing anywhere near it when 40 old men walk that mile with a young man from Quillen and Loam somewhere in the crowd behind them, holding a folder, saying asterisk tomorrow, then. They gave him the water stair. The water stair is the far end of the outer ward. The old landing steps down to the river, a gate nobody uses, a post so ceremonial it is practically theoretical. On muster morning it is where the parade ends. The old companies come in through the Almsgate, cross the ward, halt at the Stone of the Names on the water stair terrace, and the wreaths are laid, and the names are read, and the king comes down the steps. Nobody thought about that when they wrote the order. It was a punishment posting, and it was meant to sting, and it stung, and what it also did was put Guardsman Tobin Rook exactly where the wreaths are laid. I have never decided whether that was luck, or whether Color Sergeant Peyton Marsh, who wrote the duty roster in his own hand that evening, is a great deal cleverer than he lets a man see. I asked him once. He said, "The roster is the roster, Mr. Dunn," and drank his tea and looked out of the window, and that is as much as I ever got. Now the old man. I went round to Corwin's that evening, up the outside stair at the back of Trennick's Chandlery on Almsgate Row, 2 rooms over the tallow store that have smelled of candles for 40 years, and I took a bottle with me because I am not a subtle man. He had his trouser leg up and a basin of water on the chair, and he was dabbing at his knee with a rag badly, with the concentration of a man doing a job he has done for himself for a very long time and does not intend to stop doing. "You've come to talk about the wreath," he said. "I've come to talk about your knee." "The knee is a knee," he wrung the rag out. "The wreath is 19 crowns at Pharaoh's, and I have 19 crowns and 8, and I had it before he took the 25, and I will still have it in the morning. And if you say one word about lending me anything, I will put you down those stairs." "You're 84. I'll put you down them slowly." I sat. He finished with the knee. The rooms were what you would expect: clean, bare, a stove, a chair, a bed, a shelf. On the shelf, in a row, a shaving mug, a photograph of a woman with a wide plain face and a laugh caught halfway, and a folded thing in brown paper tied with string that I had seen on that shelf for as long as I had been coming up those stairs and had never once asked about. Nell Ashe had been dead 3 winters. That was the whole of the debt, if you want it plainly. She had been ill for 19 months, and the physicians of the Candle Market do not work for love, and Corwin had gone to Quillen and Loam and signed his name, and the sum he signed for was 60 crowns, and he had been paying it back for 3 years. And in the spring, the interest had been asterisk re-rated asterisk, and he now owed 140. That is not a mistake in the arithmetic. That is the arithmetic. "Corwin," I said, "tomorrow. Tomorrow I march." He said asterisk tomorrow, then asterisk, to your face. I heard him. Corwin rolled his trouser leg down over the bandage and buttoned it and sat back and looked at me with those flat gray eyes that had been looking at unpleasant things since before I could reach a stirrup. "Merit. I have laid that wreath for 51 years. I laid it the year I could not walk properly, and I laid it the year Nell was dying, and I went straight from the stone to her bedside with the frost still on my coat. I'm not going to fail to lay it because a boy with a folder has told me he'll be cross. There'll be 20,000 people on that route. Then he'll have an audience, said Corwin, and I'll have witnesses. And he smiled a small, dry, dreadful smile, and I understood with a coldness in the belly that he had thought about it, and that a part of him wanted it. Not the way a young man wants a fight. The other way. The way an old man wants just once before the end for somebody to see asterisk. I did not sleep much that night. And here is where I have to put in the thing I did not know then, and would not know for another 11 days, and which is the true middle of this story. At that same hour, in the guardroom under the water stair, Tobin Rook was sitting on the edge of his cot with his tunic over his knees and a letter in his hands that he had carried in his kit since he was 19 years old. He had gone to the palace record's office that afternoon, after his reprimand in his own time out of uniform, because he had a number in his head, 4471, and because a clerk in the pension office had told him, when he asked, that the number belonged to the 2nd Company of Sappers, and that the 2nd Company of Sappers had been disbanded 41 years ago, and that its rolls were in the archive in a box, and that nobody had asked for the box since before the clerk was born. Rook asked for the box, and in the box, along with the muster rolls of a company that no longer existed, he found the account of a night at a place called the Ferrymen's Ford, on the Callow River, in the winter of a war that everybody in Eldermore has agreed to remember once a year and think about never. I am going to tell it the way Corwin eventually told it to me, which is the short way, because that is the only way he could tell it. The bridge at Callowdown went down at dusk. That was the whole plan, and it worked. The sappers blew it and the crossing was denied and the line held. What the plan did not contain was that the 3rd Company, coming back across the water meadow in the dark, would be caught in the open on the wrong side, and that the ford, the old Ferrymen's Ford, 400 yards downstream, a shingle bar you could walk in summer, would be the only way back, and that the river that January was running at chest height with plates of ice in it the size of doors. Men went in and did not come out. That is a sentence you can say in a second and a half. The sappers had a rope across by 10. Corwin Ashe was 22 years old, a corporal, and the strongest swimmer in the company because he had grown up on the Callow and had been thrown into it by his brothers before he could talk. He went across on the rope, and he came back with a man. And he went across again. He went across that night 14 times. He brought back 11 men. 3 he could not. He never once in all the years I knew him said their names, and he said the 11 every single year, out loud at the stone in the dark before the parade, when he thought nobody was near enough to hear. I heard him do it once by accident, and I went away again and did not tell him for 30 years. The thing he could not get past, and he told me this in the end, in that room over the tallow store, in a voice I would rather not have heard, was that he never knew what happened to them afterwards. He carried them out and he laid them on the shingle, and the stretcher parties took them up the bank into the dark, and he went back into the water, and by dawn he had a fever that put him flat for 9 weeks, and when he came out of it the company had moved 80 miles and the war had moved with it, and the 11 were 11 names on a list of men evacuated. Condition unknown. Condition unknown. 51 years he had been laying a wreath for 11 men, and he did not know whether he had saved a single one of them. He thought, and this is the sentence that I cannot get out of my head, and I am an old man and I have heard a great deal, he thought that probably he had been fishing dead men out of a river all night and calling it a rescue. That is what he carried up Almsgate Row every first Thursday with his cane, and his 4 ribbons, and his 1 bare loop. Now the loop. There was a recommendation. Lieutenant Havard of the 2nd Sappers wrote it out on the 4th of Frost month, in pencil, in a field book, and it was for the Winter Star, which is the highest thing this kingdom gives to a man who saves life at the risk of his own, and there are perhaps 9 living men who wear it. Havard wrote it, and he signed it, and it needed a second signature, the counter-signature of the officer commanding, which is the way it has always been done, so that no man is starred on the word of one friend. 2 days later, Lieutenant Havard went into the Calais after a boy from the 3rd Company, and the boy came out, and Havard did not. The officer commanding was in a field hospital 60 miles away with a shattered hip and no field book. The company went forward. The paper went into a satchel, and the satchel went into a crate, and the crate went into the archive of a corps that was disbanded 11 years later, and Corporal Corwin Ashe was invalided out with a fever, a pension, and 4 ribbons, and he sewed a 5th loop onto the bar because a sergeant had told him, on the day he was carried onto the hospital train, "You'll be starred for that, Corwin asterisk," and he had believed it for a while, and then he had stopped believing it. And he had never taken the loop off. I asked him once why not. He said, "Because it's true, there's something missing. Why should I sew the hole shut?" Tobin Rook found the field book on the 2nd shelf of the 3rd box, 41 years after the 2nd Company of Sappers had ceased to exist. On the same afternoon, he was reprimanded for stepping off his post. He read the pencil. He read asterisk CPL. C. Ashe 4471 asterisk. He read the words 14 crossings and without order or compulsion, and the man is not to be believed unless you have seen him do it asterisk, which is what Lieutenant Havard, a dead man, wrote about a living one in pencil in a field book in a cold tent 4 days before the river took him. And then Guardsman Tobin Rook turned the page and found the list of the 11 that Corporal Ashe brought out of the water at the Ferrymen's ford. He read it twice. Then he sat down on the floor of the palace archive, in his own clothes, with his back against a shelf of dead companies, and he did not get up for some time, because the 4th name on the list was Signaller Dennett Rook. His grandfather died 8 years before Tobin was born, of an old chest in a long winter, in a lock-keeper's cottage at 12 Bridges on the Calais, and the family had exactly one story about him, and it was this: that he had been in the water at a ford in a war, and that he had gone under twice, and that the 2nd time a man had come back for him. A sapper, they said, though Dennett never saw a face, only hands, and the hands were the strongest thing he ever felt in his life, and that the man had carried him up the shingle and laid him down and taken off his own greatcoat and put it over him, and then gone back into the river. Dennett Rook never learned his name. He looked for him for 40 years, wrote to the Corps, wrote to the ministry, wrote to the newspapers once in the 50s, a small advertisement that ran for a week and cost him a week's wages. Signaller, 3rd Coy, seeks the sapper who carried him from the Ferrymen's ford. Nobody answered it. He was told the 2nd Sappers had been disbanded. He was told the records were closed. He was told more than once, and in writing, that a great many men had done a great many things in that river, and there was no way now of saying who. And in the kitchen of the lock house at 12 Bridges, over the back of the chair nearest the stove, where it had been for as long as anyone in that family could remember, there was a greatcoat. It was army wool, black with age, and it had been in that kitchen so long that nobody looked at it anymore. Tobin's grandmother had used it as a draft stop. His father had thrown it over the pump in a hard frost, and stenciled inside the collar, in the white block letters the Corps put on everything it owned, in a hand that had faded to the color of tea, was to Sap 4471. The letter Tobin Rook had been carrying in his kit since he was 19 was Dennett's last one, written from a hospital train to his wife. It ends, "I am to be sent home. There was a man in the river who I never saw. If ever you meet him, you are to give him anything he asks for." That is how it happened. That is the whole of it, and if it sounds too neat to you, I would only say that the Calais Valley sends its boys to the King's Foot and always has, that there are 4 villages up there that have put a man in a red coat every generation for 200 years, and that if you stand at the Almsgate long enough, you will find that half the kingdom is related to the other half by way of one cold river or another. It is not a miracle. It is a small country with a long memory and a bad habit of losing paperwork. But I will grant you this. It is a very great deal for a boy of 24 to be sitting on the floor of an archive with. The muster was the next morning. They put 20,000 people along that mile. The candle market is closed to carts from 6, and the drum ropes go up, and by 9 there is not a window on Almsgate Row without a family leaning out of it. We formed up in the market square by companies. What is left of companies? The third horse mustered 11 men that year, and I was one of them, and the youngest of us was 71. The second sappers mustered one, Corwin Ashe in a brushed coat, with a wreath of dark laurel in his hands, 19 crowns at Pharaoh's, 11 names on the card, standing entirely alone in the space where a company used to be while the marshals dressed the ranks around him. They do not fill the gap. That is the point of it. You walk in the shape your company left. He marched. He was slower than the year before and slower still on the cobbles of the row, and the crowd was so quiet along that stretch you could hear his cane. In through the Almsgate, where a young guardsman was not standing, because a young guardsman had been posted to the far end across the outer ward, past the fountain, up onto the water stair terrace where the stone of the names stands with the river behind it, gray and wide and moving. The king came down the steps. King Alaric was 60-odd that year, and he stood bareheaded in the cold as he always does, and the crown prince stood at his shoulder, and Princess Adela stood a pace behind and to the left, in the plain dark coat of a woman who has been to more of these than she can count, and intends to go to all the rest of them too. The names were read. Not all the names, you would be there until nightfall, the year's names, the ones who have gone since the last muster, and there were 41 of them, and each one got its 2 seconds of the king standing still. And then the wreaths. They go by company. The second sappers were called, and one man walked out of the rank with a cane and a wreath, and laid it at the foot of the stone of the names, and straightened and stood. And a voice from the barrier at the edge of the terrace said, quite clearly, "You still owe 140 crowns, Corporal." I heard it, 400 people heard it. Ivo Craddock had a press pass. I never did find out how, and I have my suspicions about a picture editor at the Candle Market Herald who ran a fine photograph the next day. And he was standing at the barrier in a good dark coat, respectable as a churchwarden, with his folder under his arm, and he said it in the ordinary voice a man uses to remind another man of an appointment. That is the cruelest thing I ever heard done to anybody, and there was not one word in it you could take to a magistrate. Corwin did not turn round. He stood at the stone of the names with his back to 400 people and his own dead in front of him, and his shoulders went down about an inch and stayed down. And 10 feet away, at the corner of the terrace, on the ceremonial post at the head of the water stair, with the king of Eldermore 40 paces to his left, and the whole apparatus of the state standing to attention around him, Guardsman Tobin Rook stood at the present, and did not move, and could not move, and was not going to be permitted to move if that man kept talking until the river froze. There is a great deal of nonsense talked about the discipline of the king's foot. People think it is about not laughing. It is not about not laughing. It is about that. It is about standing at the present with your grandfather's name on a wreath 10 feet away, and a young man in a good coat at the barrier saying *140 crowns to the old soldier who put it there, and holding, because the alternative is that a sentry decides for himself when the king's ground stops being the king's ground, and once one of them decides that, all of them may. He held. He told me afterwards in about 6 words what it cost him, and I am not going to repeat them because they were said to me and not to you. And when the muster was over and the crowd had gone and the drum ropes were coming down, Tobin Rook was relieved at 11, and he walked straight across the outer ward and out through the Almsgate and up the outside stair at the back of Trennock's chandlery in his full dress, bearskin under his arm, and knocked on an old man's door, which is an offense against about 9 standing orders, and I know he did it because I opened the door. I looked at him. He was white to the lips. "I'm looking for Corporal Ashe," he said. "He's asleep in the chair," I said. "He's 84 and he's walked a mile." "Then I'll wait." He waited 2 hours, standing. I offered him the other chair 4 times, and he took it the 5th, and sat on the edge of it with the bearskin on his knees like a man holding a cat he has been told not to drop. And when Corwin Ashe woke up and saw a King's Guardsman in his room in full dress at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the first thing he did was try to get to his feet. "Sit down," said Rook. "Please, sir. Please sit down." "You're in my house." "Yes, sir." "Why?" And Tobin Rook took out of his tunic a photograph of the inside of a coat collar. He had gone up to 12 Bridges on the night mail after the archive, 2 hours there and 2 hours back, and stood in his grandmother's kitchen at 2:30 in the morning with a lamp and his father's old camera, and he put it on the table, face up, and turned it round. Corwin looked at it for a long time. "That's a company number," he said. "Yes, sir." "That's my asterisk number." "Yes, sir." "Where did you get this?" "Off a coat," said Rook, "over the back of a chair in my grandmother's kitchen 41 years. And then he said, because he had clearly practiced it and it came out all in one go like a boy saying a lesson, "Signaller Dennett Rook, 3rd Company, went into the water at the Ferrymen's ford and went under twice, and a sapper came back for him the 2nd time and carried him up the shingle and put his own coat over him and went back in. He never saw his face. He never got his name. He looked for him for 40 years and he died not knowing, and he was my grandfather, sir, and I have his letter, and he wrote that if my grandmother ever met the man she was to give him anything he asked for." The room was very quiet. Down in the chandlery, a boy was rolling a barrel about. Corwin Ashe put both hands on top of the ash cane, and he looked at the photograph on the table, and he said, in a voice that had gone somewhere I had never heard it go, "He lived. He lived, sir." "How long?" 52 years, said Tobin Rook. "He kept the lock at 12 Bridges. He had 2 sons and 4 grandchildren, and I'm the last of them, and he taught my father to swim in the same river, and he was frightened of it every day of his life, and he made us all learn anyway." And Corwin Ashe, who had been shoved to his knees on the King's cobbles the day before and had not made a sound, and who had stood with his back to 400 people while a boy called out his debt over his own dead, put his face down into his hands. "One," he said. "I've got one." "You've got 11, sir," said Rook. "That's what I came to tell you. I've read the list. I've written to all of them that could be written to. There are 4 still living, sir. 4. I am going to move quickly now because the next 4 weeks were 4 weeks of paper, and paper is not what you came for. But you have to have it, because paper is what nearly beat us, and paper is what won in the end, and I would not have you thinking that any of this was settled by a fist. The boy was extraordinary. I want that on the record. He had no money, no rank, no education past the village school at 12 Bridges and the King's Foot Depot, and he had a reprimand on his sheet and a color sergeant watching him like a hawk, and he had 2 hours a day of his own, and he spent every one of them on it. He did 3 things. The first was the honors petition. The Winter Star is not in the King's gift by whim. It goes on the honors roll, and the roll for a given campaign is opened by ordinance and closed by ordinance, and the Callowdown roll had been closed by ordinance 40 years ago, and a closed roll may be reopened only on a petition supported by A, the original recommendation signed, and B, the sworn testimony of a witness, and lodged, this is the clause that nearly finished us, by a serving officer of the corps in which the deed was done. He had the recommendation, Lieutenant Havard's field book, pencil and all, still smelling of 41 years in a box. He had witnesses. 4 of them living. a retired schoolmaster in the Weald, a woman in the north who had been a nurse on the hospital train and had held Dennet Rook's hand, and 2 old men in the Callow Valley, one of whom could no longer speak but could write, and did, in a hand like a bird's footprints. He came back for me twice. What he did not have, and could not conjure, was a serving officer of the 2nd Company of Sappers. There has not been one for 41 years. The corps was disbanded. Its colors are in a case in the outer ward with a brass plate on them, and nobody left alive to salute them. The second thing he did was the loan office. He went at it like a man taking a wall apart with a spoon. He went to the candle market and stood outside Quillen and Loam and counted who went in. He went to the almshouses and sat in 14 kitchens with his cap on his knees and asked 14 old people whether they had had a letter in the spring about a re-rating. 11 of them had. 11 of them had signed for 60 crowns or 80, and now owed 140 or 190, and could not, when Rook asked them, explain how, and neither could I, and neither could a magistrate's clerk. And as it turned out at length, neither could Halbert Quillen on oath in a court with his own ledgers in front of him. And the third thing was Selby Whitcomb, the pension clerk, the soft gray nervous man behind the brass grill who had cracked on Corwin's name and could not look up. Rook went to him. He did not threaten him. The boy did not know how to threaten anybody, which is a thing men like Craddock never do work out in time. He simply stood in front of the clerk's window at the end of a working day with his bearskin under his arm and said, "Mr. Whitcomb, how does the collector know what day to come?" And Selby Whitcomb, who had been ashamed of himself every first Thursday for 2 years, put his head in his hands and told him. Somebody in the pension office was selling the roll. Not the money, nobody was stealing money. This was cleverer than that and dirtier. Somebody was selling the asterisk list asterisk, which old soldier draws what and on which day and at which window. Quillen and Loam paid 4 crowns a month for it, and knew exactly whose hand to be standing in front of when the shutter went up. It is not, technically, a crime to sell a list. It is a breach of the palace clerk's undertaking, and the punishment for it is dismissal, and Whitcomb had known for 2 years, and had said nothing because the man who was doing it was his superior and he was 60, and had a wife with a bad heart. He said all that to a 24-year-old guardsman in a corridor, and then he said, "What do I do?" And Rook said, "You write it down, sir, and you sign it, and I'll carry it." He carried it. Marsh took it. Marsh, who had spent a month pretending he had never heard of Corwin Ashe, and who had, I discovered later, quietly walked past Trennock's chandlery twice a week at 10 at night to see whether the light was on, took it to Captain Ordell, and Ordell took it to the household police. And Inspector Mabrikell of the household police opened a file on Quillen and Loam that grew, over 4 weeks, to the thickness of a hymn book. And that is the good half of the 4 weeks. Here is the other half, and I will not soften it. On the 11th of winter month, the honors petition came back. It came back from the office of the Chamberlain, over the signature of Lord Aldous Pike, secretary to the honors board, and I have read it more times than is healthy. It is a perfectly courteous letter. It regrets. It commends the applicant's diligence. It notes that the recommendation appears regular on its face and that the testimony is compelling. And it explains in 140 words that the Callowdown roll is closed, that a closed roll may be reopened only on the lodgment of a serving officer of the corps concerned, that the 2nd Company of Sappers was disbanded in the year such and such, that in consequence no such officer exists, and that the board is therefore unable to receive the petition. Not unwilling, unable. That is the thing nobody tells you about the world. Most of the wrong in it is not done by wicked men. It is done by a clause at a desk, by a man of perfect politeness who has gone home to his supper. On the 14th, the distraint order came. Quillen and Loam had gone to the county court at the Candle Market and obtained a warrant of distraint against the goods of Corwin Ashe, corporal, retired, in satisfaction of a debt of 140 crowns and 11, and the warrant named a court officer to attend and a date for the levy, and the date they chose was the first Thursday of winter month, which is Pension Day, and the place they nominated for the levy, because a warrant may be executed wherever the debtor is to be found. And they knew exactly where he would be found, because they had bought the list, was the Almsgate. They were going to take his goods at the gate, in the queue, in front of 40 old soldiers, on the morning the Crown says his name out loud. And on the schedule of goods typed itemized with a value put against each in a neat column were 1 coat wool military pattern worn, 1 cane ash homemade no value, 1 photographic likeness framed, 1 stove, 1 bed, and 1 metal bar, 4 ribbons and mounting, estimated 11 crowns. 11 crowns. That is what the schedule said. They had priced the ribbons of a man who went into the Callow 14 times in one night at 11 crowns, and they had put the empty loop down at nothing, because the loop was empty, because a lieutenant had drowned before he could get a second signature. Corwin read the schedule at his own table with his spectacles on. He read it twice. Then he folded it in half and put it under the shaving mug on the shelf and said, "I shan't go on Thursday." Corwin, 51 years I've gone to that gate and I've stood up straight at it and I've heard a man say my name. He was not angry. That was the terrible part. He was tidy about it, the way he was tidy about everything, and he was putting his life away in a drawer in front of me. I'm not going to stand at the King's Gate and have my coat taken off my back in front of the third horse. I'd sooner not eat. I've not eaten before. Then we'll pay it, I said, 40 of us, 4 crowns apiece, and it's gone. And he looked up at me, and for one moment, I saw it nearly work. Then he said, and next month. And what about Tam Ferris and the widow Lyle and old Bassett who signed for 90 and owes 200? Are you going to buy the lot of them out, Merritt, on a farrier's pension? Or are we going to leave them in it and be pleased with ourselves? I did not have an answer. It isn't the money, he said. It was never the money. It's that they can do it. That's what wants breaking. And I don't know how to break it, and neither do you, and I'm 84, and I'm tired, and I'm going to stop now. He did not come out of those 2 rooms for 11 days. I went every day. He would not talk about it. Merle Trennick sent up soup from the chandlery, and it came down again mostly untouched. The boy came twice and stood in the doorway with his cap in his hands and got about 4 words each time. And on the second visit, on his way out, at the bottom of the stair, Guardsman Tobin Rook stopped and turned round to me in the alley with the tallow smell all round us, and said the only bitter thing I ever heard out of him. "They can price his ribbons," he said, "at 11 crowns, and there is not one clause anywhere in that palace that says they can't. And I stand at the door of it in a red coat all day so that people can take photographs of what an honorable country we are." And then he apologized for it, which was worse. 3 days later, on a wet Tuesday, the Crown Prince inspected the outer ward guard. It is a routine thing. He does it 4 times a year in the rain as often as not, and he walks the line and looks at boots and asks a man where he is from, and the man says a village, and the Crown Prince says he knows it, and everybody goes home a little taller. It takes 40 minutes. He stopped in front of Guardsman Tobin Rook and looked at him and said, 12 bridges. "Sir, you wrote to my aunt's office." Rook's eyes stayed forward. "Yes, sir, 3 times, sir." Marsh, standing 2 paces behind the Crown Prince, went, by all accounts, a color not previously recorded in nature. Here is what the boy had done, and he had done it without telling one living soul, because he had already been reprimanded once and knew perfectly well what a second one would cost him. When Lord Aldous Pike's letter came back, unable to receive the petition, no serving officer of the corps concerned, Tobin Rook had gone back to the archive, and he had pulled the disbandment order of the 2nd Company of Sappers, and he had read the whole of it, all 11 pages of it, including the schedule at the back that nobody reads, which lists what becomes of a corps property when the corps ceases to be. Its plate, its drums, its colors, laid up in the outer ward, and its honorary appointments. A corps may be disbanded, its colonel-in-chief is not. The colonelcy-in-chief of the 2nd Company of Sappers is held, and has been held for 19 years, by Princess Adela. It is one of about 40 such appointments she holds. It is entirely ceremonial. It consists of a title on a list, a wreath at the muster, and a card at midwinter to the last few dozen men who ever wore the badge. It is also, in the plain words of the ordinance, an appointment held in the service of the Crown, in and of the corps concerned. She is a serving officer of the 2nd Company of Sappers. She is the only one there is. 3 letters, said the Crown Prince. What was in the 3rd? The disbandment schedule, sir, page 9. And what did my aunt's office say? Nothing, sir, said Rook, yet. The Crown Prince looked at him for a moment longer. The rain came off the peak of his cap. Color Sergeant, he said, is this man on the Almsgate? He was removed from it, sir, said Marsh, on a reprimand. For coming off his post. Why did he come off his post? And Peyton Marsh, who had 31 years' service and a pension 4 years away, and had never in his life volunteered 1 syllable more than he was asked for, said, because a debt collector put a hand on Corporal Ashe of the 2nd Sappers, sir, and knocked him down on the King's cobbles, and it was lawful, and my sentry was the only man in Almsgate Row who did anything about it. And I would take him back on that gate tomorrow, sir, and I have said so in writing twice. The rain went on falling, the inspection went on, the Crown Prince said nothing else at all. But at 8 o'clock that evening a car came down Almsgate Row, and a woman in a plain dark coat went up the outside stair at the back of Trennock's chandlery with a folder under her arm, and 2 very unhappy protection officers behind her, and knocked on a door, and sat for 1 hour and 40 minutes in an old man's kitchen drinking tea out of a chipped cup with the colonel-in-chief's badge of the 2nd Company of Sappers on her collar, and did not once, so Corwin told me afterwards, mention the word metal asterisk. She asked him about the river. She asked him what the ice sounded like. She asked him, this is the question he could not get over, this is the one he told me about 4 times, what the men had said asterisk to him in the water when he got to them. And when she went down the stairs at 9:30, she stopped in the alley and turned to me, because I was hovering at the bottom like an old fool, and she said, Mr. Dunn, is he coming to the gate on Thursday? No, ma'am, I said. They've a warrant. They're going to strip him at the window. He won't have that done to him in front of the 3rd horse. She thought about that for a moment. Then I would take it as a kindness, said Princess Adela, if you would persuade him, because I shall be at that gate at 9:30 on Thursday morning, and I should look extremely foolish standing there on my own. Now, the first Thursday of winter month came in cold and white and clear, a hard frost on the cobbles, the sort of morning where the breath of 40 old men goes up over the queue like the smoke of a small camp. We went and got him. All of us. That was Tam Ferris's idea, and I will give him the credit for it as long as I live. We did not send anybody up the stair. We simply came at 8 o'clock, and formed up in Almsgate Row outside Trennock's chandlery, 11 of the 3rd horse, and 9 gunners, and the wheeled rifles, and 4 of the old signals with their canes, and the widow Lyle, and every soul who draws at that window. And we stood in the alley in the frost in our coats and our ribbons, and we did not knock, and we did not call out. We just stood there in the cold in a queue outside his door. After about 20 minutes the door opened. He had brushed the coat. He had shaved. The ribbon bar was on his chest, 4 ribbons and the bare loop, and he came down that outside stair 1 step at a time with his hand on the rail and his cane hooked over his arm, and when he got to the bottom he looked at the lot of us and his jaw went tight. You're a pack of sentimental old women, he said. Yes, I said, fall in. And Corporal Corwin Ashe of the 2nd Company of Sappers took his place in the queue. We came up the row at 9:20. The frost was still on the stones. And on the box at the Almsgate in the cold sun, with the chin strapped tight and the rifle at his side and his eyes forward, and not one flicker of anything on his face, stood Guardsman Tobin Rook. Back on his gate, Marsh had signed the roster at 6 that morning and had gone home to his breakfast without saying a word to anybody. There were more people in that row than I had ever seen on a pension day. Word gets about. Half the candle market had found a reason to be walking up Almsgate Row at 9:30, and there were 3 men with cameras, and there was a young woman from the Herald, who had been asking questions about a picture editor, and there were 2 constables of the household police standing at the corner with their hands behind their backs looking at nothing in particular, and I did not know then why they were there, and I know now. And at 5:25, up from the candle market came Ivo Craddock. He had brought the court officer with him, a tired little man in a bowler with a printed warrant and a clipboard, doing a job he plainly loathed, and he had brought Denny Peake with the phone, and he had brought a handcart. A handcart, for the stove, I suppose, for the bed. He came down the queue the way he had come down it a month before, taking up more room than a man needs, and he stopped in front of Corwin Ashe, and he opened his folder, and he was so pleased with himself that he was almost shining with it. Corwin Ashe, he said, number 4471, warrant of distraint, County Court of the Candle Market, 140 crowns and 11. He turned to the little man in the bowler. Read it to him. He can read, said Corwin. The little man read it anyway. It took a minute and a half and he read it to the cobblestones. And at the end of it he said, in the voice of a man who has done this 800 times and hated it 800 times, "Do you offer payment of the sum, sir?" "No," said Corwin. "Then I'm obliged to levy on the goods in the schedule." "The goods are up the stair," said Corwin. "The door isn't locked. Take the stove, take the bed. You'll leave the photograph or you'll answer to me in front of that gate." And that would have been the end of it. I want you to understand that. The little man in the bowler had already begun to say something about the photograph being of nominal value, and he would have left it, and they would have gone up the stair with the handcart and taken an old man's stove, and it would have been lawful and wretched and over. But Ivo Craddock had not come for a stove. "Item 9, he said. The little man stopped. "Item 9, said Craddock, on the schedule. Metal bar, 4 ribbons and mounting. 11 crowns. And he looked at Corwin Ashe's chest and he smiled, and I understood in one horrible clear breath that this was what the whole month had been for. Not the money, not the stove. He had put the ribbons on that schedule himself, and he had waited 4 weeks for this morning in front of this queue at this gate. "It's on the warrant," he said. "Hand it over." The queue moved. 40 men. It was not a rush. We are none of us capable of a rush. It was a sort of tightening, a shuffle inward, canes coming up off the cobbles, and the 2 constables at the corner came off the wall very fast indeed. "You touch that bar," said Tam Ferris, "and I'll—" "It's on the warrant *," said Craddock, delighted. "Ask him, ask the officer." "Is it on the warrant?" "It is on the warrant," the little man in the bowler said wretchedly, "but I would very much advise." And Ivo Craddock reached out and took hold of the metal bar on Corwin Ashe's chest and tore it off his coat. The stitching went. It made a small dry sound like a match being struck, and it came away in his hand 4 ribbons, 41 years old and 1 bare loop, and he held it up, level with the old man's face, and he shook it so that it rattled. 11 crowns, he said. And Corwin Ashe, standing very straight, in a coat with a torn place on the breast, said the only thing he said to him in the whole of that month. "There were 3 I couldn't reach," he said. "You'd have been the 4th. I'd have gone back in for you anyway." I do not know, to this day, whether Ivo Craddock understood one word of it. What he understood was the sound the cue made, because 40 old soldiers laughed at him. Not loudly. It was a low, dry, terrible noise, the noise of men who have been laughed at by better than him and outlived them, and it went up and down Almsgate Row, and the young woman from the Asterisk Herald was writing, and Denny Peake's phone was up, and somewhere behind him a man with a camera took the picture that would be on every front page in the kingdom by that evening, and Ivo Craddock's face came apart. He drew his arm back and he swung at Corwin Ashe. I saw it. I was 4 feet away and I saw all of it, and I have never been able to make it take as long in my memory as it must have taken in the world. He was 27 and he was built like a door, and he put his shoulder into it, and it was going into the face of an 84-year-old man who had his hands full of a cane and could not have moved out of the way of a slow tram. It never landed. There is a thing they do in the King's Foot that has no name that I know of, and I have asked. It is not a block. It is not a strike. It is the movement a man makes when he takes a step and turns his shoulder at the same instant and puts his own body into a space where a blow is going to be. And it is the oldest thing a soldier does, and the only one they never had to teach anybody. Tobin Rook came off the box. He was 11 feet away, and there was a queue of old men between him and it, and he went through the gap where the little man and the bowler had been standing, and the little man went sideways into the wall, and Rook got there in the time it takes a young man's fist to travel about 18 inches. He did not knock Craddock down. He did not have time, and knowing what I know of him now, I do not think he would have. He put himself in front of Corwin Ashe, shoulder square back to the old man, the rifle held down and away in his left hand, away, deliberately, the whole length of his arm out of it, and his right arm went back behind him and closed round the old man's ribs and pulled him in against the wall, and asterisk held asterisk him there. And he took it on the face. It caught him high on the cheekbone, half under the chin strap. His head did not move. That is the thing that I have heard described 11,000 times by people who were not there, and it is the one thing they always get right, because it was the only thing to see. The bearskin did not shift a quarter of an inch. He stood in the middle of Almsgate Row with an old man gathered in behind his right arm and a young man's fist coming off his cheek, and he did not go back, and he did not go down, and he did not hit him. He did not hit him. I want that in this account more than I want anything else in it. Every man in that row was screaming at him too. 40 of us, and the constables running, and Craddock already drawing his arm back again, because he had felt bone under his knuckles and it had frightened him. And Tobin Rook stood in front of Corwin Ashe with his rifle held out and away from the trouble, and did not lift a hand to him. He gave the challenge instead. Gate, and it went off that wall like a bell, assault on the row, turn out the guard. The wicket banged. Craddock's second swing never got anywhere near, because Tam Ferris hooked his ankle with a cane, which I have always felt was the single most useful thing the wheeled rifles did in their entire history, and he went down hard on the cobbles on his own handcart. And then the 2 constables of the household police were on him. And then there were 4 guardsmen through the wicket at the double, with Colour Sergeant Peyton Marsh coming through it sideways like a landslide. And Ivo Craddock was face down on the King's cobblestones with his own folder scattered round him, and a court officer's warrant blowing up Almsgate Row in the frost. He was still shouting when they got the irons on him. He was shouting that it was lawful. He was shouting, I know the rules, he's not allowed to touch me, which was, when you think about it, perfectly true, and Tobin Rook had not touched him. And into the middle of all that, at exactly 9:30, a plain dark car turned in at the top of Almsgate Row with an outrider ahead of it, and stopped. And Princess Adela got out. She had come, as she had said she would, to the gate. She had come with the Chamberlain's secretary in the seat behind her, and a folder on her knee, and she had come to stand at a brass grill on a cold Thursday morning, and hear a clerk say an old man's name and number out loud. What she saw instead, from about 40 feet, in the clear white frost, with 3 cameras running and 100 people in the row, was a debt collector being lifted off the cobbles in irons, and a torn metal bar with 4 ribbons and an empty loop lying in the gutter where he had dropped it, and a guardsman of the King's Foot standing with his back to the wall, and his rifle held away, and an 84-year-old veteran of the 2nd Company of Sappers held safe in the crook of his right arm. She stood there for perhaps 5 seconds. Then she walked the whole length of Almsgate Row, past the constables, past the handcart, past Ivo Craddock, and she did not look at him once, which I am told he has never entirely got over. She stopped in front of the 2 of them. She bent and picked the metal bar out of the gutter with her own hands, and straightened up, and looked at the boy's cheek, which was already closing up on that side. "Guardsman," she said, "are you fit to stand?" And Tobin Rook, who could not salute because one hand had a rifle in it and the other had an old man in it, said, "Yes, ma'am." "Then stand," she said, "and I'll get on with it." She lodged the petition that morning at the Almsgate at 20 to 10 in her own hand, as Colonel-in-Chief of the 2nd Company of Sappers, a serving officer of the corps concerned, the only one there is, exactly as page 9 of the disbandment schedule provides. Lord Aldous Pike received it. He was, by every account, entirely courteous about it, and I am told he wrote a private note afterwards to a young guardsman thanking him for finding a clause that his own office had lost, which I think is the most that can ever be hoped for from a man at a desk. The rest went the way things go when they finally go. The film that convicted Ivo Craddock was Denny Peaks. He had left it running. He filmed the whole of it, from item 9 to the irons, and he sold it to a picture desk before lunch, and it was played in the county court of the Candle Market at his own trial and at Craddock's, and there is a certain justice in that which I have never tired of. Craddock got 3 years. Assault on a sentry of the King's Foot in the execution of his duty is not a small thing in this kingdom, and the bench said so at some length, and it added the assault on Corwin Ashe on top of it, and it barred him from the collection of debts for life. He served 2. He is somewhere north of the Weald now, I believe, driving a delivery lorry, and I hope he is decent to whoever is old on his round, and I do not much expect it, and it is not my business any longer. Halbert Quillen went down for rather longer, because Inspector Kell's hymn book file had by then become 2 hymn books, and because the spring re-rating turned out to be a thing he had invented at his own desk with a pen. 14 of those debts were struck out by the court as unlawfully compounded, and Corwin Ashe's was one of them, and old Bassett's was another, and the widow Lyle cried in the corridor and told me she felt like a thief, which is what they do to you. The clerk who had been selling the pension roll for 4 crowns a month was dismissed and prosecuted. Selby Whitcomb kept his window, and his post, and his wife, and was commended in a paragraph of the court's judgment that he had framed, and which hangs in his hallway to this day where anybody who calls has to look at it. And on the 4th of the following month, the palace published an ordinance which is called, in the books, the Almsgate Regulation, and which is called by every old soldier in Eldermore Ashe's Rule **. It says 2 things. It says that no debt may be levied on a crown pension at the moment of its payment, nor within the outer ward, nor on any pension day. And it says that no honor recommended and signed shall be barred from the roll by the disbandment of the corps in which it was earned. 2 sentences. 41 years too late for a lieutenant who drowned in the Callow, and about 11 minutes too late for a torn coat, and it is still the best morning's work I have ever seen a boy of 24 do. The Winter Star was conferred on the first Thursday of Frost Month, at the Almsgate, at 9:30 in the morning. Not in a hall, not on a dais, he would not have it. King Alaric came down through the outer ward, and out of the wicket in the black iron gate, and stood on the cobbles of Almsgate Row, and the queue was where the queue always is, and Selby Whitcomb put the shutter up at the usual time, and read the names off the roll in the usual order. When he came to it he said, and his voice held, Ashe Corwin, 2nd Company of Sappers, 4471. And Corwin Ashe stepped up to the grill, as he had stepped up to it every first Thursday for 51 years, and the King of Eldermore pinned the winter star into the empty loop on his bar, where the stitching had been worn pale by 41 years of nothing hanging there. 4 men stood behind him. They had come from the Weald and the North and the Callow Valley, 2 of them in wheeled chairs, one of them who could no longer speak and who wrote something down on a card and gave it to Corwin and would not let anybody else see it. 4 of the 11. The old man went along that little rank, and he took each of them by both hands, and he could not say one word, not one, and he did not need to, and there was not a dry face in Almsgate Row, including on the box. Including on the box, I looked. I make no apology for looking. Guardsman Tobin Rook stood his post that morning with a yellow-green shadow still on his cheekbone and his eyes forward and his chin strapped tight, and he was, as far as the palace and the photographs and 400 years of standing orders are concerned, entirely unmoved throughout. He brought the greatcoat down from 12 Bridges the week after and tried to give it back. Corwin would not have it. He turned it over in his hands and read the stencil inside the collar, 2 Sap 4471, and he folded it up again and put it into the boy's arms and said, "Your grandfather kept it 41 years and he never met me. It's not mine. It stopped being mine on the shingle. It is over the back of the chair nearest the stove in the lock house at 12 Bridges, where it has always been." Corwin Ashe lived 4 more years. He laid the wreath every one of them, 11 names on the card, and he never changed the number, though I asked him once whether he oughtn't to, now that he knew. He said, "The wreath isn't for the ones who lived, Merritt. The ones who lived don't need a wreath. They need somebody to open the gate for them once a month and say their name." He died in the chair by his stove on a Tuesday, with the photograph of Nell on the shelf beside him, and he was 88. They gave him the Almsgate. He went out through the little black iron side gate with 6 of the King's Foot carrying him and the 3rd horse walking behind, and 40 old men in ribbons on the cobbles of Almsgate Row where he had queued for half a century, and a sentry on the box, presenting arms, absolutely still. The sentry was a color sergeant by then, which is quick, and which surprised nobody who had been in that row on the first Thursday of winter month. He did not move a muscle from the moment the coffin came through the wicket until it turned the corner into the candle market and was gone. Not one. His face might have been cut out of the wall behind him. That is what they are for, you see. That is the whole thing, and it took me 79 years and a torn coat to understand it. People look at those men standing at the gates in their red coats and their bearskins, and they think the stillness is the point, that it is a trick, a performance, a very expensive way of not scratching your nose. It isn't. The stillness is only the price. The point is that when a fist comes for an old man who cannot get out of the way, there is a body already standing between them, and it got there because it had been standing there in the cold, in the rain, saying nothing, for a very long time, waiting. Corwin Ashe went into a black river 14 times for 11 men he never saw again. And 51 years later, at the gate of the palace, one of them came back for him,